Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll be starting momentarily. We're just going to let everyone connect. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome to Financial Aid 102, New Year, New FAFSA. I'm Amanda Mills, Assistant Director of Admissions. We will have some very special guests behind the scenes answering your questions, but the most important part of this evening is Nick Pruitt, the Director of Financial Aid at Stony Brook University, our guest presenter. And obviously, we also save time for some of your live questions, so use the Q&A feature to post those as your questions come up. This session is being recorded and will be available on the undergraduate admissions YouTube page for Stony Brook in a few days. And I'll post some links for you to bookmark later. Now, please join me in welcoming Nick. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Nick Pruitt. I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at Stony Brook University. It's a pleasure to chat with everyone this evening. This has been a very interesting year for us in financial aid. We like to say that January was a very long year. Part of that has to do with really the FAFSA process. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about the FAFSA. I'm going to share a little bit of a financial aid timeline, let you know what we're looking at as far as sending out award notices to students, and provide you a little bit of information. So let's get this started. Make sure I'm on the right screen, and we will go to the next one. Our year really started planning for this year for you to join us in the fall of 2024, in the fall of 2022, when the Department of Education really started laying out the foundation for something that's called FAFSA simplification. So really, what is FAFSA simplification? Basically, if I want to put this at a really high level, the Department of Education changed the FAFSA form. Congress thought there were too many questions on the FAFSA, so they decided to take a few questions off and make it easier for students and families to complete the process. Last year, about 27 million people completed a FAFSA process. So far this year, we're at about 3.2 million who have gone through the new process. The new process really focuses on a redesign. We in financial aid think it's been long overdue. The rollout for the process hasn't gone as seamless as possible. That's the nice way that we will say. In a typical year, the FAFSA becomes available on October 1st. This year, the FAFSA became available on December 31st. So if you're sitting out there tonight and you haven't heard about the new FAFSA, then we in financial aid and your high school counselors are doing a poor job of really kind of communicating with you. If you haven't started, or if you're having trouble with your FAFSA, this is really kind of a good opportunity for you to ask some questions tonight. We have a number of people behind the scenes that'll help you. Feel free to use the Q&A session, the webinar chat. We can see everybody who's out there, and we're going to cover a few important topics for you. I won't bore you with all the congressional lingo, but the changes to the FAFSA really started with the Future Act, which was passed about 3 years ago to give the Department of Education enough time to simplify the FAFSA and make it easier for everybody to complete. As you can tell by my comments, that process hasn't gone really seamlessly. I think that's the best way. You see my first point on there. It's a seamless process. Well, it sort of is a seamless process. The goal of it is to really expand student aid eligibility for everyone who's applying to attend Stony Brook or any of the other institutions that are out there. In the past, so let's go back about 10, 15 years, there would be a paper application. Families would sit down with their tax returns from the current year, input the information, and then mail it off. And then maybe 10 years ago, we started submitting those online. It got to the point where last year there were only a few thousand students that were actually completing the FAFSA by paper. Everyone else was doing it electronically. As part of that piece, the U.S. Department of Education and the IRS entered into a little bit of a partnership to make sure that the information could be shared between schools. Part of this goal was really to make sure that students and families were pulling the correct information from their tax returns, loaded it into the FAFSA, and then sending it off to the schools. So the new process really tries to reduce some of those barriers, expand eligibility. This current year at Stony Brook University, about 40% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. With the new FAFSA and starting this fall, we expect that number to actually increase to about 50% of our students are going to be eligible for the FAFSA. So as I noted before, in the past month, we've seen about 3.2 million students file their FAFSA. This has also created a little bit of a challenge for us. As part of that process, when you complete the FAFSA, there are some upfront questions, really to help identify students or families that are in unusual circumstances. We have some students that are homeless, at risk of being homeless, in foster homes, could be unaccompanied. All of those students will have basically a simpler process to complete the FAFSA to make sure that they're eligible for aid. The big piece that we noticed with families as we sat down and we've really worked with them last year compared to this year really has to do with what they call the FTI, or the Federal Tax Information Direct Share Program. So when the process starts, a student and a parent will sit down, the student starts the FAFSA, and the student will identify what's called a contributor. I'll discuss a little bit more about the contributor piece in a little bit. But that student and that parent or contributor can go directly to the IRS. The information is imported directly, and there's no really like third step process. The past few years, there's been kind of an opt-in option where the FAFSA redirects students to a third-party site. Students log into the IRS. The information is then transferred back to the FAFSA. This year, it's supposed to be a more seamless process, and that's the feedback that we've actually heard. The other piece really has to do with new student aid index. So I've spent most of my career talking about an EFC, or an expected family contribution. This year, we're changing our terminology to a student aid index. Us in financial aid really can kind of use those two terms interchangeably. They're really going to be kind of the same thing. But the way it's calculated behind the scenes, it does change a little bit. The new FAFSA and the student aid index now, instead of being a 0, which would be our most high need students, now can be a negative number. So families that are in kind of a low income situation can now have a negative 1,500 student aid index. For our purposes in the financial aid office, we treat that the same as a 0. We've asked Congress, we've asked the Department of Education why it's negative 1,500, and no one can really share that information with us. So if you have a negative 1,500, or if you have a student aid index below 0, please know that you're going to receive the largest financial aid package that we are going to award to you. I already mentioned a little bit about the Pell Grant access, that we see about a 10% increase in our student population. In our next slide, we're going to talk here about what a contributor is. And so this is kind of a new term for us. In the past, we would tell a student to complete the FAFSA with their parent, typically their custodial parent. This year, a contributor is anyone who's required to provide information. And so this would be most likely the parent or adoptive parent or a spouse or a step parent that provides support to the student. Just like previous years, it can't be a grandparent, foster parents, brothers, sisters, aunts, or uncles, or anything like that. So when a student sits down, they complete their section of the FAFSA, then they identify who a contributor is. There's a piece that's called a contributor wizard, or a parent wizard, to let you know which parent is responsible for providing more of your contribution. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And then the student will identify a contributor, and then they will need that contributor's name, social security number, an email address. And then the Department of Education will invite that parent or contributor to provide information to the FAFSA. Then that parent and or step parent would provide information through the FAFSA. The student would not be able to see that information. The parent's portion is separate from the student's portion. They would sign it, and then they would complete it. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about how to get through all these steps in a little bit, but that's kind of a little bit of the high level review of what a contributor is. Here's kind of where we're at in the timeline. The FAFSA is available. We've been doing this presentation for a couple of months, and we have one slide in here about how to create a federal student aid ID. So if you haven't started the FAFSA, or if you haven't started a federal student aid ID, that's really where we need to be at in the process right now. In mid-February, schools should start receiving the information. On Tuesday of this week, we did receive information that would be delayed until March. So mid-March is when we're actually going to start receiving FAFSA information, which actually coincides with when our priority date is. One thing that I'll take a little side note here and talk a little bit about is each institution really wants to get your FAFSA information so that we can get award notices out to you. Our priority date typically is February 15th, but what we saw was a number of students were struggling completing the FAFSA. And I've seen a number of questions in the Q&A about, hey, we've started doing this, we're having a little trouble. What do we need to do to complete the application? We've heard some feedback from students, from parents, and we pushed our priority date out to March 15th. So that still leaves you about a month to complete that priority deadline for FAFSA. There's still plenty of time to complete the FAFSA for that. After that. What we really prioritize with that priority date is really two programs. One is called the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, where the Department of Education gives us about $860,000 to divide among our 27,000 students, and a federal work study program, where the Department of Education gives us about $1.7 million, once again, to divide among our 27,000 students. So if you file your FAFSA after March 15th or April 1st or in May, we encourage you to do it sooner. But if you do it later, those are really the two programs that you're missing out of as far as our institution. If you're looking at us and you're looking at other institutions, please pay attention to what their dates are. I usually don't talk about other institutions, but UConn, which is about 30 miles across the water from us, a little bit further than that. Their priority date was February 15th. They heard some feedback from their students, and this afternoon they made the announcement that they're pushing theirs back to March 15th. So if you're looking at other institutions, just pay attention. If you haven't filed your FAFSA, go ahead and file your FAFSA, and then you really don't have to worry about the priority date. We're going to go into some Q&As that we've had a lot of people ask us in the past in a couple of slides here, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the issues that some of our students and families are having. Next stop here. So what should you be doing right now? If you haven't started the FAFSA process, you need to go out and create a federal student aid ID. You can do this at studentloans.gov, create your federal student aid ID, and then you really need to determine the parent or the contributor. We're going to kind of use those terms interchangeably tonight about who really needs to be included on the FAFSA and who is the contributor. Let's talk a little bit about contributors right now. So if the parents are divorced, it would be the parent that provides 50% or more of your support. If your parents are married and they file a joint tax return, you really only need one contributor. We have heard from some families where they have asked who the second parent is, but we haven't had confirmation that an email goes out to them asking them to do anything. Basically, that FAFSA process goes to look at the IRS. So a joint tax return, only one parent, that information comes in, it loads into the FAFSA. Some students have expressed concern that they have asked who the second parent is. Not that big of an issue. If the parents are divorced and they file separate tax returns, be the parent that provides 50% or more of your support. So let's say one parent doesn't work, the student lives with that parent, the other parent works and provides child support and or alimony. If that contribution is more than 50%, that's the parent that needs to be on the FAFSA. If that parent has remarried, then that new step parent's information would need to be on the FAFSA. So here's where we're going to start to split. And we've talked about doing a little diagram of how many parents might be involved. But if a parent remarries, there's a step parent. They file a joint tax return, it's really just the parent that filed. We'll ask who the FAFSA will ask who the second parent is. If the parent has remarried and they file separately, then the parent that is providing the information, that contributor, is one person, and the step parent is also the second contributor. So basically, two emails would go out. Those two tax return information would come in. They would load into the FAFSA, and then we would move along in the process. This all starts really with that federal student aid ID. We've heard from a number of students that maybe have parents that don't have a Social Security number. As part of the FSA ID creation process, the primary way to do it is with a Social Security number. You can also use a TIN number or a tax ID number. If those aren't options, then there are some additional questions that the Department of Education allows to verify identity. This afternoon, I was speaking with a parent, with a student whose parent actually lives in Hong Kong. The parent couldn't make it through the questions to verify their identity, partially because the information couldn't be emailed to them in Hong Kong on two issues. One, the email wouldn't go through, and two, their phone number couldn't act as a verifiable issue because they had a new country code. So that was a new one for us to experience today. What the Department of Education has recommended for that student and parent is to complete their FAFSA by paper. And so that seems to be the option right now, unless that parent can help verify their identity. All right, we're going to go through a couple of questions here. I think I kind of covered this one earlier. When does the FAFSA need to be completed? Our priority date is March 15th. We've heard other schools that had priority dates as early as January 15th, February 1st, February 15th. Just pay attention if you're looking at us and you're comparing us to other institutions. I think that's a really important one for us. This is one I think I've seen pop up twice in the question and answer already. What about multiple students attending college? Previously in the FAFSA, it used to ask a couple of questions. One was how many people live in your household and how many students are in college? The original FAFSA formula allowed the parent to contribute towards a student's education. If a parent had multiple students in college, that parental contribution would be split between the students. With the changes to the FAFSA and the increased eligibility, Congress removed that as an option. This means we have a few students on our campus, and for us at Stony Brook with 27,000 students, about 1.3% of our students appear to be impacted by this. Since we haven't received any FAFSA information, we haven't been able to compare. What does that look like moving forward? We're going to do some outreach to students to really evaluate the situation. We do not anticipate making any major adjustments to either the formula or our process, but we really want to see how students are impacted, whether that opens the opportunity for us to allow some institutional funds to help maybe offset for 1 year. We're really not sure yet. We really need to identify how many students were impacted by this. And what we're really talking about is students that maybe when 2 students were in college, they had Pell Grant eligibility. And now with the changes, maybe that student moves out of Pell Grant eligibility. We're going to evaluate that, and we'll be reaching out to impacted students and families. Each institution is going to approach this slightly different. And so we would encourage you, if you're looking at us and compared to other schools, to really kind of ask this question and kind of move forward there. I think I kind of covered this one a little bit earlier, but for parents who file separately and they're living together, do both parents need an FSA ID? Yes. So if your parents are married, they're in the same household, both the parents are your mom and dad, or maybe a step parent. Anytime they file separately, both of those contributors would need a federal student aid ID. And so that's an important piece. So that means the student completes their portion. They would list 2 contributors. Those emails would go out to both individuals. When they complete their section and sign their section with their federal student aid ID, then that's when the FAFSA would be completed. One of the changes here with the new aid process is we at the institutional level do not receive a FAFSA until we actually get that completed, and until all the parents are signed. We've been told by the Department of Education that if a student completes their portion, they ask their parent to complete their portion. They have 60 days to get that taken care of. The student can log into their account and see if their parent has taken care of it, or they can also send a nudge email out to them to help complete that process. So what is a negative student aid index? I think I foreshadowed this one a little bit earlier. For all my years working in financial aid, a 0 EFC meant that you had the highest financial need. Now there's a negative 1500 EFC. We treat that just as a 0, and we use that information to really award financial aid as we kind of move forward. So what does it mean to be a contributor, and what does it mean to have consent? I think these are really good questions. When a student starts the FAFSA process, because a FAFSA is tied to each individual student, they go through what is called a parent wizard. Parent wizard identifies the parent that should be the contributor or contributors based on their tax filing status and their marital status that needs to be included on the FAFSA. students, so this is primarily targeted towards our first-year students, but if there are independent students, so if any students are out there, you're listening to this and you're married, then your spouse would be a contributor. So you as a student would complete your portion, you would email that to your spouse, and then that information would also be included in there. When that contributor email goes out, one of the first questions that it asks is, are you willing to consent to provide your information to this individual? If the contributor says no, then the FAFSA becomes rejected, and that is not sent to the school. So make sure you're having a conversation with your contributor and know that they need to contribute to the FAFSA. There is an option in the FAFSA if a parent or contributor is unable or unwilling to provide that, then that could open the opportunity for you to take out student loans. The maximum amount of first-year student can take out in student loans, these would be unsubsidized student loans, would be $5,500, which really isn't going to go far towards covering the cost of education. And I think this is really that FAFSA conversation and that FAFSA contribution piece. So really, how do you determine who that contributor is going to be on your FAFSA? The parent wizard that I've talked about, and I think I've gone over this, but we keep trying to stress this. If the parents are married and their tax filing is married and filing jointly, you only need one federal student aid ID and may ask you who the other contributor is, but that person won't need an FSA ID. If the parents are married and they're filing separately, then both parents would need to be contributors. They would both need federal student aid IDs. They would both need to contribute to the FAFSA information, and they would both have to consent. If the parents are separated or divorced, it's the parent that provides 50% of the student's support, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the custodial parent. We spent years talking about the custodial parent. The rules changed, and it's the parent that provides 50% or more of the support. Social Security numbers. Previously, in completing the FAFSA, if you didn't have a Social Security number, you couldn't be a contributor. The answer is now is yes, you can create a federal student aid ID and a contributor without a Social Security number. At that contributor phase, you'll need to provide an email address that's associated with that person. It can't be the same as the student's email. That's been one error that students have been reporting. You will need a mailing address, and then there will be a series of questions if you don't have a Social Security number to really verify what that identity is. We've been told that the Department of Education has contracted with TransUnion, which is a credit agency. So if you have an apartment lease or if you have any loans or any type of credit history, they're going to ask you a few questions. I think if anybody's ever pulled a copy of their credit report, usually asks you, do you have a loan from this place? How much is your monthly payment? When you answer that series of questions, they will use that to verify your identity, and then it will move along in the FAFSA process. If you don't happen to live with the parents who support you and they live outside of the country, this is where it gets really kind of interesting because your parents are the ones that need to be the contributor on the FAFSA. A contributor can really only be your biological or your step parents or your adopted parents. So let's say you live with an aunt or uncle in the US and maybe your parents reside outside of the country. They would technically be the contributors. They would not most likely or may not have a Social Security number. They would be the contributor. One way around this would be if you're in a legal guardianship. We see a number of students that maybe have a parent that resides outside of the country. They live with an aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, sister in country, and they go through the formal legal process of becoming a legal guardian. Then that sort of bypasses that and makes the student eligible to be an independent student. And then that parent information wouldn't be required on there. We see lots of combinations of how the student is here. And so if you have questions about that, or if you need some more information, feel free to reach out to our office or any financial aid office that you're really interested in. All right, so one of the key components of determining your need is determining how much family income that you have. This really starts with the FAFSA process and starts with the tax returns. So when a contributor provides their information, the U.S. Department of Education sends the information to the IRS. They verify if there's a tax return on file for 2022, or they verify that there is not a tax return on file for 2022. And so if you have unusual circumstances or your information isn't available, then there's some other pieces where they may ask for information. So let's say a parent resides outside of the country, the IRS would have a no match. They would ask if you had foreign income. And then the FAFSA is going to ask you a new series of questions that are going to be based on how much your income is from that foreign country. All of that information would need to be manually entered into the FAFSA, and it may be subject to verification at the school level. So we may send out additional information asking you to verify maybe that income was earned in Honduras or Hong Kong or Tanzania, any of those places like that. We would just need to verify what that income is. We would use that to help calculate and determine what the eligibility is. This kind of hits on that. If they filed a foreign tax return, you're going to manually enter the information in there. If you don't have income and you are not required to file a tax return, then that's most likely going to yield you and make you eligible for the most amount of federal financial aid that's available. So over the last month, we've had students that have started submitting the FAFSA, and right now we're just waiting. Originally, we were told at the end of January we would start receiving that FAFSA information. On Tuesday of this week, they told us that it would actually be March 15th or mid-March. They haven't actually given us a specific date. This just factors into that timeline that I went over earlier. Right now, we're waiting on FAFSA information. We need to determine students' eligibility, and then we will send out our financial aid award notices. So if you haven't heard this from your high school counselors, you haven't heard this from other schools, right now we're looking at having the ability to send out those award notices in the early part of April. That's mainly because the Department of Education isn't sending us any information until at least mid-March. It takes a few weeks to get our systems updated and get those award notices out. We hope to be one of the first schools in the state and in the SUNY system to get award notices out. That's what our goal is. We have heard from other schools, either within the SUNY system or other schools within the region, that they may not be able to get award notices out until the end of April or March. So this is just an important piece for you to pay attention to. If you've submitted your FAFSA, you should receive an email from the Department of Education that should be what's called a FAFSA submission summary. That information will go out to you. The Department of Education will also let you know as soon as they have processed the FAFSA and they've started or began sending that to schools. So you should get one immediately after you complete it, and you should get your second one as we move later into the process. Right now, our acceptance date nationally is still May 1st. We hope to give students about a month if we're able to package in early April to really make their decision. If you're out there and you're trying to compare awards across the institution, this is where it gets just slightly interesting, where not all schools are going to be able to send their award notices out at the same time. Some schools have started, or there has been some discussion about maybe pushing that May 1st deadline. If Stony Brook or any of the SUNY schools do that or make that decision, we will be the first to let you know about that. What you may also see, though, is at Stony Brook, we do have limited space for housing. So while we may push back an acceptance date, or we could consider pushing back an acceptance date, some of those housing dates are still going to be really important. Another big picture piece is if those acceptance dates are pushed back, it also pushes back the time that you could actually enroll in classes during the summer, giving us or other schools the opportunity to provide you with like a summer orientation or a summer welcome program and get you enrolled in your classes. We want you to make the best decision. We want you to have the best financial aid package. And we do know that you're going to compare financial aid offers between schools. We always like to say that there's three things that you're looking for in a school. One is a personal fit. Does it feel good to you? One is an academic fit, and the other is a financial fit. In our financial aid office, we have that conversation quite frequently, and we say that sometimes you get two of those three. So please keep that information in mind as we move along. Another piece, a number of families have what are called 529 plans. With the 24-25 FAFSA, are you required to report the information? Yes. You only need to report the value of the FAFSA for the student whose FAFSA is being completed. So if you have one student, two students, you have one student still in high school, you're really just reporting the asset value of what that 529 plan is. I'll also talk a little bit about a 529 plan. what a 529 plan really needs is a bill. Our bills typically go out around January 15th, between July 15th to July 20th with a due date of August 15th. Your 529 provider would typically want a copy of that bill. You would send that to them and you would request the amount of money that you would want out of the 529 plan. Typically takes a couple of weeks for them to process that and get the check sent. So just keep that in mind as you're contemplating the use of your 529 plan. All right, asset components in the FAFSA are slightly different. And assets include any amount of child support that you've had or received. This is reported as an asset instead of income. That's kind of one change. Also, there's been a change with either business or farm net worth. Both of these need to be included on the FAFSA. Previously, if you had a business, you only had to report it if you had more than 100 employees. Now you need to report the net worth of the business, regardless of the size of the business. The same really goes for a farm. It's the net worth of the farm. We've had a lot of families say, well, how do I know how much my business or how much my farm is worth? We've tried to, I'll be honest, we've tried to cheat a little bit. Typically, if you have a business or a farm, you typically have an accountant that helps you with that. We've encouraged students and or parents to reach out to their accountants and kind of determine what that net worth is and to really help them and report that on the FAFSA information. I think we talked about that in the previous slide, but for dependent students, educational savings accounts only count on the parental asset. And they only count if they're in the name of the student whose information is being reported on the FAFSA. There are a number of major issues with completing the FAFSA process. I've seen a couple of them pop up in the questions that we've answered thus far tonight. Students who incorrectly select non-eligible citizen on the FAFSA form are prevented from completing or submitting after or submitting any corrections. The workaround for this is a student can delete the existing application and then start a brand new one and start over. Part of this goes back to what I mentioned earlier. We haven't received any of the FAFSA information. We know there are a few errors. We are super excited or eager, I guess is more the terminology, to identify the FAFSA information that's sent to us, identify the errors, and then we will be conducting some outreach to you to let you know, hey, maybe this doesn't look right, and maybe you can make a correction to that. This is also kind of one of those issues. Students who have completed the FAFSA are unable to make any corrections until their FAFSA is processed. So if you were super eager and on December 31st, you were one of the few people that got in during the 2-hour window to complete your FAFSA, and maybe you made an error or maybe you didn't add all the schools that you wanted, you can't make a correction to that until the FAFSA is actually fully processed. And so I will leave that information with you. And we will be doing some outreach. We have a list that we were checking internally. There have also been a few issues with parents with no social security number who have been unable to start the FAFSA form. There really isn't a workaround for this. We have heard that some families have been told to complete a paper FAFSA. The online FAFSA uses what's called smart logic. So it doesn't ask you every question. This is kind of the brainchild behind making the rules to make it simpler and quicker for you to complete the FAFSA process. The paper FAFSA that some families or students that have had difficulty are asking to submit has every question. If you do a paper FAFSA, then sometimes you have to make a correction via a paper FAFSA. So when we're sitting down with families or students, we're doing all that we can to make sure that they are answering every question correctly, and that they're trying to do it online, because we've seen some issues in the past, and we really want to make sure that everybody is able to do that. All right, so that is me talking for quite a bit. I know we've had a few questions that have kind of popped up there. Lindsay has one flagged for me. It says other colleges like IRT are doing their own specific financial aid application. Is Stony Brook doing that as well? So there are kind of two application processes for schools. One is the FAFSA, and so as a state school, we use the FAFSA information. Other schools use what's called a CSS profile. This is where they collect additional information at maybe private institutions. Some public institutions collect it, really to determine the total eligibility that a student has for financial aid. We've kind of looked around at doing our best to really provide information to you about what your aid package is. Our best resource for you, and we'll get it dropped in the chat. I'll ask one of my teammates to do that, is to really use our net price calculator. We have spent a lot of time and a lot of resources using the net price calculator tool. This uses basically our historic financial aid awarding information. So if you've completed your FAFSA and you have your student aid index, you can plug that into the net price calculator. It will give you an estimate of what your financial aid is going to be, and it'll give you an estimate of what your total costs are going to be. So for families that are really pressed or trying to determine if they can afford to attend us or other institutions, first I'll say every financial aid office is required to have a net price calculator. So you can go out and you can take a look at these. So if you're comparing us to RIT or any other institutions, you can get an idea of what the aid package is. My caveat here is this is an estimate, and if you complete the net price calculator, you'll see that we have a lot of disclaimers on there. What we found and compared and put the resources in is that we believe that this gets you really close to what your financial aid package is going to be. So let's say we send out an award notice to you on April 1st, and another school that you're really interested in hasn't given you an award package by May 1st. I would encourage you to take a look at their net price calculator. I would encourage you to take a look at what the financial aid offers are, and I think we will get you pretty close to what the total cost of attendance are going to be. All right. Other questions? Anybody? Lindsay, you want to
Yeah,
go?
yeah. So one question that popped up that I thought was interesting and should be addressed was for work studies. If the question's no longer on the FAFSA form, what should students just kind of be aware of regarding that?
Yeah, earlier I talked a little bit about what our FAFSA priority date was, and one of the funds that we have is we have federal work study. For federal work study, we have about $1.7 million. We spend about $8 to $9 million in student employment on campus. So if you're interested in a campus job, I will say that you don't have to have federal work study. What we are going to do is identify students that are eligible for work study, and we are going to do our best to divide that among the population. Previously, we really used that work study question to determine eligibility. Students had the choice previously of yes, no, or they don't know. If they said yes, we put all those students into a pool, and then we kind of awarded it based on need and kind of based on a first come, first serve award process. One of the things if you come for an admitted student day, we spend a couple of slides talking about campus employment, and we spend some time talking about work study. And I think the biggest takeaway is work study is you get a job on campus. It doesn't go directly to your bill. You get paid a bi-weekly check. You can use that to help cover your incidental costs of being a student. That's really how kind of those programs kind of work. Okay. One question I see that's popped in there, will the net price calculator include merit or other institutional aid? At the point of admission, we send out our merit-based awards, so you should know what that is to begin with. And then it would include any type of institutional or need-based aid that would go out. Okay.
So another question, I think that a lot of students or families are having any kind of advice for those who kind of may be in limbo at this point, who who can't know they need to make a correction but can't make a correction, or they know they need to sign it but they can't sign it.
Well, one, I think be patient, and two, know that we are doing all that we can to advocate. Our National Financial Aid Association had a conference Monday, Tuesday of this week, and it was such a big deal with the FAFSA rollout that the Secretary of Education attended and took questions and provided feedback. And so the Department of Education is committed to helping students fix this problem, helping schools fix this problem, and to serve as a resource. Anytime when you have a brand new process that rolls out, there are kind of some bugs. We keep track of those on a regular basis, and we identify new ones on a daily basis as well. So I think the biggest piece is hang in there. We encourage you, and so this is where we sort of get stuck, is we can't see your information, so we don't know how to help you fix it until we actually get it. And so our commitment to you, as soon as we start receiving that information, if we see errors, one of the questions that's popped up in the last week or so, one of the questions asks if you're interested in unsubsidized loans only. The question was worded kind of poorly, and so a lot of students have said yes. This means that it skips over the parent piece, the student signs it and sends it on, which means a student may not be eligible for a Pell Grant. That's one of the first groups when those FAFSAs come in. We're going to reach out to the students and make sure that they wanted to do that. The other piece is really identifying, making sure that you listed the right schools. You can list up to, I think, 30 schools now on the FAFSA in one go, but maybe you decided that Stony Brook was kind of a late addition and you needed to add us. You really need to wait until that FAFSA is processed before we can do that. This also kind of lingers over into the TAP process as well. So if you're a New York resident, you're interested in the TAP program. The TAP program used to start with you filing your FAFSA. That information will be sent to TAP or the Higher Education Services Corporation. And so right now, the TAP application needs that FAFSA information. They can't get it until we start getting it, which means you can complete part of your TAP application, but it sort of just hangs out, just like the FAFSA application, until they get that match done. So if we start receiving FAFSAs in mid-March is what they've processed, they've also said that we'll start receiving those on a rolling basis. We are not sure what rolling basis means. We don't know if that means that we're going to get, 1,000 files in a week. If we're going to get 5,000 files in a week, we're not quite sure yet. What we do know is right now there are 3.2 million FAFSAs waiting to be processed and sent out to schools. We also know that this federal system can't process all those at once. So think about dividing 3.2 million by 250,000, 500,000, 1 million, and stretching those out over a few days to process each batch. It could take us a little bit of time to get that. So I think that's really important. All right, what other questions?
So, what if a parent and a step parent file a joint tax return, but the step parent did not receive an email from FAFSA? Does only one parent have this? Is only one parent's signature enough?
Only one parent's signature should be enough. We had a couple of staff in our office complete the FAFSA for their students, and it asked for that second contributor email information. It also asked for the primary contributor's email. Only the primary contributor received notification from the Department of Education, and the second one didn't, provided they filed a joint tax return. If they filed separately, then both parents would need a FSA ID, they would both need to sign it, and they would both need to consent to the process.
Okay. Another question. It seems like we have a few on contributors and trying to figure out like a student determining if they're dependent or independent. Can you just kind of go over those standard independent questions that pop up?
Yeah, I think I got a little carried away pushing on my keyboard. Oh, I have the slide up. We'll get there in a second. Yeah, so a student, so if you're fresh out of high school, you most likely need to have a contributor. To be declared an independent student, you need to be married, have a child, be an illegal guardianship, be an orphan, ward of the court, be a U.S. veteran, or be a graduate student. Those are really kind of the main ones, or you need to be over the age of 24. If you don't really meet one of those criteria, you're required to have a contributor information as reported on the FAFSA. This is the contributor slide. The contributor can be a student, student spouse, biological or adopted parent, parent, spouse, or step parent. So if your parents are divorced, they live in separate houses, it's one parent. If that parent that is your contributor that provides 50% of your supports is remarried, then that step parent needs to be included. If they filed a joint tax return, you really need one FSA ID, but it may ask who the second person is. If they filed separate tax returns, both of them need to be included. Both of them need to be included even if they have some legal documentation or they don't want to contribute. The Department of Education really doesn't take that into consideration, and that parent needs to be the reporter there. Yep.
We have a few questions regarding FAFSA and TAP. Can you just clarify kind of what the difference is so they know kind of what resources it's coming from?
Yeah, so the FAFSA is federal student aid. FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. This is where we would determine your eligibility for federal student loans, federal work study, supplemental educational opportunity grant, Pell Grants. It's really going to be the main ones. If you're a New York resident, the state of New York has a separate need-based application program. That application program is called the TAP program. This is kind of a high need eligibility program. So if you qualify for a Pell Grant, you will most likely qualify for a TAP award, provided your parents pay taxes in the state. So let's say you live, as long as your parents pay taxes in the state of New York, you should be eligible for TAP based on what the income thresholds are by the state. State also has a secondary program called the Excelsior Scholarship. Excelsior Scholarship is for families that make under $125,000 a year. Excelsior Scholarship is a last dollar award. So if you have Pell and you have TAP, and it exceeds what our tuition is, that's the way the Excelsior is awarded. Maximum Excelsior award is $7,070 a year, to attend to attend Stony Brook School, because or Stony Brook University, because that's what our tuition is. So if your combination of other awards exceeds that, then you are not eligible for the Excelsior Award. If it's less than that, then the state of New York will provide an Excelsior scholarship that will make up that difference. And then for each year you receive an Excelsior scholarship, you're required to reside in the state of New York for 1 year after you graduate. To maintain eligibility for the Excelsior Scholarship, after your first year, you need to have 30 credit hours. After your second year, 60. After your third year, 90. And all the credits that you take need to be degree applicable, which means they count towards your degree program. So if you want to be a biology student and you're really interested in underwater basket weaving, that may count as an elective in your program, but if it doesn't count towards an elective or your program, then that course that you're enrolled in doesn't count towards those numbers there. So I see another question that popped up. What's a negative student aid index? For aid purposes, we treat a negative student aid index the same as a 0. We're not really sure why when Congress changed the formula, why there's a negative 1,500, but it is part of the formula to help determine, I think, how students are eligible. The new FAFSA, and I don't want to go into great detail, but the new FAFSA kind of changed what the Pell Grant formula was. And so I mentioned earlier that we see this year 40% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. Next year it's 50. Some students will automatically qualify for a Max Pell Award. And then they've also created what's called a Minimum Pell Award. Since we haven't seen any FAFSA information, we only have their tables and their charts to really kind of explain to us how that works. But we would use that to determine what Pell eligibility is going to be. All right, other questions?
Great. It seems like the questions are kind of winding down, but I guess if there's no more questions, just one kind of final, what kind of advice do you have for those students who completed it and know that they have to make corrections, but they can't? Kind of just like, I know you mentioned it before, but just kind of one final thought.
I think we really have kind of 3 groups of students. One group of students who are still worried or still haven't begun their FAFSA process. So my first advice there would be, it's not a scary process. Nationally, they have released some numbers. It's taken students the first time somewhere about 23 minutes, I think is what they said at Monday during a press release. That's really kind of consistent with what it has happened previously. The main issues, so one, if you haven't completed your FAFSA and created your federal student aid ID, that's what you need to do right now. Hopefully you have a second window open, you're listening to me talk, and you're working through that process. Second piece are the group of students that have completed their FAFSA, they've been able to submit it, and now they're like, hey, what do I do? So right now we're in a wait and see. We're sort of saying the exact same thing that you are, is that we really want you to see the information so that we can get financial aid awards out to you. The third group are the people that know maybe that they've made an error. Maybe they know that they checked a box incorrectly, or they realize subsequently that they've checked an incorrect box. Maybe they need to add another school and they need to make a correction. You're sort of in the same boat that we are at Stony Brook. We are waiting for that first process to happen. We have been assured by the Department of Education, you will receive an email from them when they process it. At that point, you can go in, you can log in, and you can start making corrections. That's also when we will get the information and we will go in and we will start looking for errors and we will start looking for issues. We have kind of a checklist that we are prepared for. We're adding to that each and every day, and we are hopeful to send out some targeted communications to you saying, hey, we think maybe this isn't right, or is this really what you meant? Because we really want to do our best to maximize what your aid eligibility is going to be. In previous years, FAFSA started in October. Department of Education is a little bit behind in the total number of FAFSAs that are processed. That's mainly because the first 2 weeks of the launch, the FAFSA process wasn't really open. We at the school will do our best to help you. So if you have questions, you can reach out to us. We may not have the answers and we may not be able to help you. We have been spending some time and we've been referring students to the Department of Education. They have a phone number, they have a chat, they have some email. The phones there have been really busy this month. I won't lie, I won't skirt around that. They are providing some extra resources to that, and hopefully they can help you if you are having issues. If you know it's an issue and you say, hey, this is what I think the problem is, drop us an email, reach out to us. We're here, we're happy to help. I think that's the other big piece. Otherwise, look for an email from the financial aid office first part of April saying, hey, here's your financial aid offer, and then we can take a look at that. One other point that I would add there is sometimes we say we've already started hearing from students who say that maybe they can't afford it and they would like us to reconsider maybe a merit-based scholarship that we've awarded them. We're not really going to evaluate any of that until we are able to deliver you your full financial aid package. So we would encourage you, if at that point we send a full financial aid package and you still have some of those questions, that's a better time to ask. There's not really much that we can do now because we really don't have a complete picture of what your financial situation is. Those are my points. Amanda, hey, you're back.
Yes, I'm back. Thank you so much. I know I'm speaking for everyone when I say so much really excellent information during such a confusing time for everyone, and the stressful time of having to just wait and see. So we do appreciate you providing this really, really important information to everyone. 65 questions, not too shabby. So we really do appreciate that. And we want to say to everyone, what seems to be the most important thing is to make sure your email accepts Stony Brook and Stony Brook financial aid emails, and that you are checking your spam and filters for anything that might come from all these different places, because the email seems to be the most kind of critical piece, that if you miss an important email, you might miss, some time with getting what you need to know. So with that, I will wish everyone good luck with, for those of you who haven't heard from admissions yet, we're working on your applications every day, all day long. So you'll get your decisions over the next few weeks and months. And for those of you who've been accepted, we congratulate you and thank you for your patience as you wait for your financial aid packages. Good luck to everyone with your college decisions. And thanks again to Nick and the financial aid team. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.